Rolling into this story without knowing what just went down feels like watching a storm roll in and not realizing it's heading straight for your front porch. 1 minute, everything's quiet. The next minute, the entire Second Amendment world is waking up to alarms. What's up? This is Ted from Line 45. And today we're diving into why Trump's DOJ stepping into Illinois' AR-15 ban is the kind of move that flips the whole damn table. Before we dive in, do me a solid. Smash that subscribe, tap the bell, hit all the dang buttons down there. You don't gotta, but it keeps this train rolling and lets me crank out more of this wild gun talk for y'all. All right, enough of that. Let's get back to it. Why Illinois picked this fight? When I look at Illinois, this is pretty much the testing ground for how far a blue state can push gun control. After the Highland Park 4th of July parade shooting in 2022, where 7 people were killed and dozens were injured by a shooter using an M&P-15 style rifle, lawmakers went straight into never again mode and started drafting a full statewide assault weapon law. That turned into the Protect Illinois Communities Act in January 2023. On paper, it bans the sale of AR-15 seconds and a long list of other semi-auto rifles, over 1,000 specific models, plus so-called large-capacity magazines. For rifles, anything over 10 rounds is out. For handguns, 15 and up is the line. You can keep what you already own, but you have to tell the Illinois State Police what you have and register it if it fits their assault weapon definition. So from the state side, they think they are building the model gun control law for the whole country. Strongest bans, strongest mag limits, registration on top. From my side of the fence, that combo is exactly why Illinois became ground zero for a straight-up constitutional showdown. You are not just talking about some fringe gun here. You are talking about the most popular rifle platform in America, everyday standard capacity mags, and a government list of who owns what. That is why everybody is watching this one. The federal judge who blew up the ban, for a moment, Judge Stephen McGlynn, is the one who actually put real legal weight on this thing. He is a federal district judge in the Southern District of Illinois, appointed in 2020, and he got the Barnett v. Raoul case that directly targeted the Protect Illinois Communities Act. In April 2023, he issued a preliminary injunction that blocked Illinois from enforcing big chunks of the rifle and magazine ban. That meant, for a short window, the state could not enforce its assault weapon and large-capacity magazine restrictions at all. For people on the ground in Illinois, that was the first time they saw the law genuinely shut off, not just argued about. In that order, he walked through Bruin and Heller and said, in plain terms, that AR pattern rifles and standard capacity mags are in common use, owned by millions of ordinary citizens, so the Second Amendment clearly covers them. Once that coverage is established, the burden shifts to the government to show a historical tradition of similar restrictions. Illinois tried to point to old laws on traps, Bowie knives, and some early 20th century machine gun laws. McGlynn basically said those were not real analogs to a flat ban on the most popular semi-auto rifles and their magazines. From my point of view, that is the core of why gun owners were nodding their heads at that ruling. Now here is where it turns into a short-lived win. Within days, the Seventh Circuit stepped in and stayed his injunction while the appeal played out. So enforcement of the ban snapped back on. So you had this weird moment where dealers and owners saw a green light, then almost immediately went back into a restricted environment. That fast whiplash is a big reason I say this case forced people to pay attention to the courts, not just the headlines, because you could see in real time how one judge can give you breathing room and the next level up can take it away. Trump's DOJ breaks all the rules and steps in. Here is where this whole thing takes a weird turn for Illinois. Instead of the federal government backing the state or just staying out of it, Trump's Department of Justice walked into the Seventh Circuit and filed an amicus brief siding with the gun owners in Barnett versus Raoul. That brief is not light commentary. It is a full DOJ document that straight up tells the court, PICA violates the Second Amendment because it bans AR-15 seconds and mags that are in common use for lawful purposes, which is exactly what Heller and Bruin said you cannot do. From inside the brief, you can see how the administration is thinking. They point to an executive order from President Trump in February 2025 that tells the administration to protect Second Amendment rights nationwide, and a memo from Attorney General Pamela Bondi creating a Second Amendment Enforcement Task Force. That is DOJ policy saying, we are going to spend federal energy backing lawful gun owners, not just chasing gun crimes. Then, in the argument section, they hammer the idea that AR-15 seconds and similar semi-autos are arms covered by the text, owned by millions, and that there is no valid historical tradition of banning them just because politicians call them militaristic. Normally, you see groups like the NRA or the NSSF filing those kinds of briefs, while the DOJ sits in the background. Here, the DOJ is shoulder to shoulder with them, telling the court to affirm Judge McGlynn and keep Illinois from enforcing the rifle and mag ban. For gun owners, that is the federal government saying on paper, this law has to go, and that is a big shift in how D.C. is playing this game. The common use argument, Illinois can't outrun. When I look at this fight in Illinois, the whole thing really rests on one question. Are AR-15 seconds and standard mags in common use by regular people? Heller laid that phrase down back in 2008, saying the Second Amendment protects arms in common use for lawful purposes. And Bruen doubled down by making courts start with the text and history, not interest balancing. Once something is covered as an arm, the government has to justify its restriction with real historical analogs, not vibes and headlines. AR-15 seconds clearly sit inside that framework. They are semi-automatic rifles with one shot per trigger pull, sold for decades, and used for everything from home defense to three-gun to varmint hunting. On the numbers, this is where Illinois looks rough. NSSF estimated that by 2020, there were over 20 million modern sporting rifles, mostly AR style, in civilian hands, and that number has only climbed with the sales spikes after 2020. Other research out of Georgetown's Center for the Study of the Public Consequences of Guns found tens of millions of Americans living in homes with AR-15 type rifles and tens of millions of so-called high-capacity magazines in circulation. You also have industry data showing hundreds of millions of detachable magazines in private hands, with 30-round magazines being completely normal for AR platforms. When something is owned at that scale, calling it unusual just does not pass the straight-face test. So when Illinois says, we can ban these rifles and mags outright, they are running straight into that common use wall. From my perspective, they are trying to treat the most popular rifle pattern in America like a rare, exotic weapon. Under Heller and Bruen, once you prove widespread lawful ownership, the burden flips to the state to dig up a real historical tradition of banning that kind of arm. That is exactly where their argument starts to fall apart. Why this case could force the Supreme Court's hand. Here is where this Illinois mess turns into a national problem. Right now, you have multiple federal circuits wrestling with rifle and mag bans. The Seventh Circuit is dealing with Illinois and Naperville. The Ninth Circuit has California's assault weapon and mag bans in cases like Miller and Duncan. The Fourth Circuit has upheld Maryland's ban in Bianchi. Different panels keep reaching different conclusions on how Bruen applies to AR-15 seconds and large-capacity magazines. And every time that happens, the pressure on the Supreme Court goes up. Once circuits are clearly out of sync, the justices start running out of excuses to sit on the sidelines. Now add Trump's DOJ into that picture. When the federal government walks into the Seventh Circuit and tells the court, these bans fail under Heller and Bruen, that is not just some random amicus from a gun group. That is the executive branch signaling that, as far as federal policy is concerned, bans on commonly owned semi-auto rifles cross the constitutional line. If the Seventh Circuit still signs off on Illinois' law while another circuit goes the other way, you have a clean split with the United States itself on record against the bans. From my perspective, that is exactly the kind of setup that makes a Supreme Court grant of cert a lot more likely. The court likes good vehicles, and a case with a full record, a clear circuit conflict, and the federal government arguing that Bruen blocks AR-15 bans checks every box. If that mix lands on their docket, they will have to either bless these bans nationwide or tell every state they push too far. What happens if Illinois loses? If Illinois takes an L on this, I am telling you right now, every other ban state is watching. You have similar assault weapon and mag laws in places like California, New York, New Jersey, Maryland, Connecticut, Washington, and a few others that borrowed the same playbook. They all went after AR pattern rifles, set mag caps at 10, and tried to justify it with the same, these are extra dangerous story. If a federal court knocks down Pica under Bruen, lawyers in those other states are filing copy-paste briefs the next morning. No cap. On the ground, the changes would be very real. Dealers in Illinois that have been boxed out of selling ARs and standard mags get that product line back. Owners who were forced into registration schemes suddenly have a strong argument that those database requirements cannot stand if the underlying ban is unconstitutional. Litigators would go straight at mag limits, feature tests, and future transfer bans. because all of that stuff hangs on the same common use and history analysis. If magazines of over 10 or 15 rounds are protected, that nukes the core logic of large capacity bans across the map. Big picture, what I see here is a reset on how far states can lean into gun control. Instead of try whatever and let it ride for 10 years, they would have a Supreme Court-backed line that says, if it is a commonly owned semi-auto rifle or a normal capacity mag, you do not get to ban it or ration it with nonsense workarounds. That is a huge shift in how gun law works day to day in this country.